Hi, Brian McAuliffe. Welcome to another episode of Cognitive Resonance, where we find creators in our midst and amplify their dreams and the wonders that come out of the human being, if you will. I have the pleasure of meeting just a few weeks ago Sara Cahill Marron. I'm sorry about that.
Marron.
Because Marron. We were at a meeting for Bloomsday through a mutual friend. And Bloomsday is the James Joyce Ulysses book. And we just started chatting a little bit in between the reading times. And this entire subject matter came up about poetry and AI. And we got on a couple of subjects there. So I don't know if, when you were explaining to me this book, which that you've written, called me Spes, which has got a Greek, the name of the book, as I'm discovering things, this is, we've had a lot of people on this show so far, and this is as pure a creator as we've ever had. So people have taken things, but here you've pulled from a lot of different places. And when you told me that, about this creation of this, you're a published poet already, and this is just your latest book, and you say, well, I wrote a poetry book about AI, and I'm like, well, it's also in a novelistic form, and I'm pausing, trying to understand this whole thing. So maybe we can roll back a little bit to when did you start writing and creating, and maybe that origin. We kind of go through a process. What's that origin story? How did you come about?
As a writer?
Yeah, as a writer, in the initial path of things, I guess, with just a little background.
Sure, yeah. The spes is the word. It's a Greek word, before I forget. And it means hope. So I'll get into that when I talk about the book. But my writing journey, I guess I was always a writer. I remember a compliment when I was in grade school that, oh, you could write the speeches for the president. And I was like, oh, that's a job. Cool. I didn't know. But it didn't happen until college, when I took English courses and then a poetry course, where I felt something different about composing and writing. I ended up taking graduate courses. I got a master's at St. John's in English literature composition, and was in love with the poetry portions of that degree. The pieces of it that I loved were the building blocks that to me felt more like music than writing. Yeah. And part of this book was also inspired by those interdisciplinary ideas.
You mentioned to me, and part of that, I don't know when it happened, but you mentioned to me a book, which I did order. It's here, Artist Way. And when did that come in? That's from what I've read so far, that you recommended, it's an entire process of discovery and finding yourself as a creator.
Right.
Was that way in the beginning, right after you got out of school, or does that something just came along afterwards?
That is when I was in law school. So Julia Cameron's book is all about tapping into the spiritual in creativity, and her motif is that everybody has this creative spirituality within them, and that in fact God, or whatever you choose to call it, is inherently creative. So if you're interested in the arts in any way, it can go hand in hand. So to find whatever moves you spiritually, whether it's yoga, running, church, you can access your creative energy. So I learned about this book from a group of women that I was friends with while I was in law school. And I was I thought I had writer's block. I had written my first book and worked on a small chapbook, which is just a collection of poems. And I was frustrated. I was trying to do a law degree and study and learn that way. And I felt like I had abandoned my creative self. Yeah. So we met every week at the Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., which is a gorgeous museum. I mean, New York has fabulous museums, but that's one of my favorite places. And we would discuss the book. And honestly, what came out of that meeting was Spes. It got me thinking creatively again, which to me as a poet is not just I sit down at a word processor and write out a piece and it's lyrical and beautiful. Creativity in my poetry is a practice of learning, naming, and organizing the world around me. So everything that I take in, unfortunately, if you have a conversation with me, you may end up as the subject of a poem one day.
So one could only hope. When we met at Toast and we speak for a while, the thing that hit me right away, and I'm a very spiritual person, and I have a book in me sooner or later, maybe never, but the idea is that I would call the book In His Likeness, and one of the In His Likeness principles to me is this idea that that we can create. And of all the things in the world that you see, I mean, it's hard for me to believe that there's not some creator that it's just everything is, you're so unique, and all the things around us, even something as simple as a pencil, is like, well, how did that happen? And I think no matter, what philosopher you listen to, this has always been, we're not going to solve this equation by speaking about it, but it does get me. And I thought, wow, this person is got this narrative that is bound by a belief in a God or creator. And again, I think your expression of it is perfect. What that is for anybody is, but the fact that there is a spiritual energy. I think that would be the closest word that I could use to what I think creativity is, a form of energy to me.
Or resonance, like
a resonance, yes.
Cognitive resonance.
Yeah. Oh, what a good one.
Yeah. That's definitely, so Spes is not, I would say, as spiritual as maybe my first book actually plays a lot harder into some of those questions I was asking myself that you're bringing up, which is, what is it? How do you name it? But I'm very interested in form and architecture of writing, of creativity, of how you structure a work of art so that somebody can immediately engage with it. And this book does the same thing. My first book used the rosary. I think we were discussing that at Toast, to structure the creative channel that I was trying to evoke. This one, after doing the artist way and trying to discover, what I wanted to build with a book, because for me, I know a lot of poets that I work with or that I edit. I do some editing on the side, and for me, that's like a mentorship. It's another way to practice what I got from those women at the portrait gallery, which was community and fellowship in my creative practice. So when I work with other people, the question is always like, well, what is correct? How do you get to the perfect poem, the perfect composition, rhythm, meter? And there isn't really an answer, but it happens in that communion between people, between yourself and the work, and what you read. So everything that I'm ingesting or that you're ingesting is contributing to that creative.
I'm glad we're working on your next book right now.
Creative spirituality.
So if we can move a second to, AI. Now I'm in a technology company, and of course my eyes lit up when you said, well, I wrote poetry about AI or a poetic novel, which I'm going to ask you to explain to everybody what
novel
the structure is of that. But I had read a book, and I have it here too, the Second Machine Age, which I read a couple of years ago about AI and its threats and its fears and its benefits and such. And one of the stories in the book has to do with chess, and I think this is a good way to explain people who are not familiar with AI at all and what the potential benefits are. So for a long time, and I'm paraphrasing out of the book, for a long time we had this computer, the IBM Big Blue, which would go against the grandmasters, Kasparov and such, and they'd fight it out, and then the computer would win sometimes and not sometimes. And then we got to an AI machine, and now humans can never win. The machine wins every single time against humans. And what happened there is that the Big Blue was programmed all the moves that one could make on the board. It was programmed on how to play chess. And when they went to the machine learning or the AI type model, all they did was told the computer the rules. And the computer found ways. So it did things that a human player would never do. It would lose its queen right away. It would do things that, it would approach these things. And then when you apply that reasoning differently, then you have more solutions than you have had before. And this is now proven true in the AI world with gene therapy and coming up with pharmaceuticals and such, where there's approaches that a human just wouldn't. We said we would never have gone down that structural path to get to that solution. So I am, a big fan of what I think of this as like the Industrial Revolution. Everybody was scared of it, and certainly the people who were scared were the people who were farming, and now the machines are going to make all the things. The cobblers were afraid about machinery. So we're on this new precipice, which is changing. NVIDIA is going to be worth $3 trillion. I mean, talk about a few years back, we were talking about a company becoming $1 trillion company, and now all of a sudden NVIDIA is on and they're only making chips, and this is that. So maybe we could spend a few minutes educating us a little bit about what the style is, this poetic and novelistic thing, and then the AI thing, and why we shouldn't be so scared, or maybe we should be scared.
So my novel in verse. That's perfect. This is the table of contents. It's untraditional, to say the least. Most poetry books are organized with each poem having its own title. These poems are titled after locations, and there's 3 separate chapters that are my own little pun or joke into how iPhone glass is made. I did a lot of research on Gorilla Glass.
Like
Corning.
Yeah.
And so molten suspended fusion and glassifying, which is not shown here, are the stages that glass were created. So I thought that was a cute way to give the main character in this book, which is an AI, her own sort of world. And the places are these are actually places that are significant in my life. And, that's a whole separate conversation, but significant locations at the top that organizes this table of contents is somewhere in your iPhone, if you're an iPhone user, that you can go to and see where your phone has tracked you. So it'll organize the places that you visit the most. So your office here would be a significant location. And it tells you, it knows how you got there, if you walked, if you biked, if you took a taxi. It knows how long you took to do that, exactly what time you left and arrived. And I learned about this in law school. I was working at a federal job and going to class at night, and some friends that I had were interested in NLP, which is the natural language processing. And so I was learning all kinds of weird things about the tech that I wouldn't have been exposed to. This was one of them. And I looked in my own phone and saw how much data that my phone had just because I carry it around with me. And I suppose it scared me for a minute, but I also was fascinated by this. I couldn't believe that this little thing had done that kind of minutia in tracking me. So my creativity, just to touch on the spiritual part of it too, is like I'm sort of a perpetual optimist, and those sorts of things, they do scare me for a moment, but I'm also really curious about them. And so I started learning, and it turns out at that time, that was 2018, right about there, the natural language programming and processing were just sort of being written about and getting attention. And the basic idea is that a computer at the bottom uses zeros and ones, binary code, to organize itself. Then NLPs are like boxes of those zeros and ones go in. And a programmer or someone that's teaching an AI to code will use these boxes and stack them up like bricks in a house until the computer has enough context to understand, say, what we're talking about and be able to respond in a way that's coherent. So this book uses that idea of learning by context to create a character who she names herself Spes around halfway through the book. And I use that word specifically because it means hope. And I really wanted to intentionally insert that into this story.
She finds that word through her knowledge base.
Yeah.
And she is the one who associates that with.
She calls that, that becomes her identity. And so, I mean, that was important for me to have the machine name herself that, because that's what I believe. And another big piece of this book, I kind of skipped over the novel piece, I suppose. It has an arc. So it starts with, the computer being just a responsive cell phone or very basic technological mimicking. And by the end of the book, she's tried to develop her own identity. But problem is the identity is based completely on the user. And so every poem is addressed, dear user, as if the machine is trying to write like a love letter to its user. And desperately through overheard interactions, bus rides, train rides, walking through the city, desperately trying to understand.
I haven't, because I just getting the book, and I haven't, but just the concept of it is mind blowing. That that could come out of your. Is it movie worthy? Is it something that somebody could maybe somebody watch this and say that sounds like a great concept?
Well, there's several movies, Space Odyssey and the movie Her from the early 2000s, but they all end sort of horrifically. They're depressing, they're scary. And I also love horror just as a genre. And so I wanted to play with that. And so this book has a character who she actually goes through a little bit of heartache at the end because she's trying to understand this person, you or me, from the pocket, and she can't. And love comes up, spirit comes up, God, addiction, suffering, all of these human concepts that you pointed out. The chess story that you were telling really interests me because I'm a Duchamp fan. And I think that that's missing always in AI is the connection of love or spirit. And it's missing because we can't quantify it. And we're the ones that are instructing the machines.
I think we're having more trouble with that these days than ever because we have a society that can be relatively independent. You don't have a situation where in generations before you really needed a family unit and you needed to have tolerance because that's the only way you're survived. And now, we have a large part of our population living independent lives, some of them not romantic. I mean, we may have a population crisis because of that. So I think it's brilliant that you've got an AI person there who's almost trying to solve that, naturally trying to solve that communication problem. I can't wait to read it, to be honest with you. We have to finish this interview. So.
Okay. Should we talk about
Yes, let's talk about this.
Yeah, so this is from a presentation that I prepared for, it was a talk for educators. And I, again, went down the rabbit hole of researching, what was relevant for teachers at the time. But I think you always learn best from, review of experience. So after I gave this workshop, I realized that most of the questions were they're fear-based. How do we catch students from plagiarizing? How do we give prompts that don't encourage the use of technology? And they were interesting questions for me to think about. I was also trying to sell the book. So I was talking to these teachers from what I perceived as a place of fear and protection and defense and desperately, sort of like Spes, trying to channel, no, this is creative at its core. Even learning at a university is creative at its core. And I suppose maybe that's my mantle right now as a poet, is to wave the flag of spirituality and creativity above all else. So who cares what the machine is writing? And you can create a really fast poem in ChatGPT, or you can upload an essay that you've written into it and have it give you edits or rewrites. But what are you missing from that? And in my opinion, what's missing is the practice, is the meditative practice, the spiritual practice, the connection with yourself, sometimes all of those things.
Can you go to the automated world, the machine automated world, and say, well, here is a piece of wood that's been turned into a wonderful sculpture by an artist by hand and created from nothing. Some artist saw something there. And then, but you could also buy a duplicate of that that's been scanned and made by a machine. So you'd still have, even though they're essentially identical. I mean, we can recreate a painting that looks almost like that painting, but there'll still be more value in the thing that was handmade, even if you only were told it was handmade. I mean, certainly Malcolm Gladwell, you've read some of his books,
Blink,
and where, they have this statue and, they're arguing over whether it's authentic or not. And they've got all these letters saying it's authentic. But then around the corner comes one of the proteges of the original artist. And before they get halfway through the door, when the thing's still at a distance, it says it's a fake, because they can then splice. And this concept of Blink is that you make your
Snap decisions.
Yeah, snap decisions are sometimes better decisions because they don't get filtered by all this other logic. Like you're making that fight or flight defense, they become, more in deeper in your brain. So that whole concept of it being human created, I think is what, like, I think I did throw in this idea. I said, listen, if you want an idea for a business, get a guaranteed human label, start a program or some sort of licensing thing where you got guaranteed human. I went online and somebody already took that, whether they're doing it or not. But to me, that there's going to still be value with something that somebody put 1,000 hours into versus, but it's the same as a machine, right? What would be different than, somebody who chiseled something versus the machine was put into a machine that was made it. And it's exactly the same duplicate, but that original is still going to have more value. Why? I know I haven't bought a lot of art, but the people I've bought art from are people I've personally met. I've met the artist. I can't meet the AI. Like, I could read the AI, I could digest music that's listened to it, but part of what we like about some of the famous artists is their stage presence, their personal connection, the way they work with their fans. There's good music. There's plenty of good music already written. So the AI is going to write some music. Okay, great, but it can't promote that the same way a human can. So I'm more a fan of this new modernity, if you will, than I am fearful of it. But I think I had the.
Well, there's one other
that's
thing
evolving.
That you're describing, the mirror. Everything that we've created technologically is a mirror of us. So when we coded these AIs, we taught it our language, the context that we have around certain words. And we said, you can be creative in certain areas, but here is how the language works. And I read recently that there's like a scary article, I think it was the Times, saying that these two AIs had created their own language. Fine, yeah, scary. But they're using language, and at the core, that's human. Yeah. We told it to do that. Yes. Yeah, they would have never, or who knows, but we taught it everything it does. So to the extent that you're horrified by AI, look in the mirror, because we are the creators there. And so poetry to me is like, it's my favorite medium, so I'm biased, but it is the perfect medium to play with these AIs, because the AI can't do total creativity. It can't take the wealth of a human experience and sculpt something that's brand new. It can only imitate it. And maybe that'll change, but I think what you're saying about meeting the artist and knowing the person, it's always just going to imitate that.
Yeah, and if you think about exactly what you said earlier on, is that everything that you experience, you're in the world experiencing things. So let's just take, for instance, that you've been taking a walk through the forest in the fall on a windy day, and you've heard the trees rustle, and you've looked up and the sun, glares through the screens, and that walk in the creek is babbling. That walk is giving you some inspiration. So that's a live experience that you've been able to have with all of your senses. Now, granted, you could have been there with your phone and had the microphone on and had the camera on, and the AI is now seeing it through that filter. And maybe the phone has got a wind indicator and a temperature indicator and such, but it still doesn't have all our senses. It doesn't feel the weight of our foot as it goes to the ground, or whether that ground's soft and mushy, or what have you. It doesn't necessarily understand what putting our hand on that rock does. So this sensory ability that humans have, no matter how good the processing gets, because what we're doing is improving the ability to process, process faster, more data, process. But what still makes us more human, and I feel is still a long way off, is the wealth of our senses and how rich they are, how rich our hearing is. I've only met you once before, but if you called me the next day on the phone and you had a cold, I would immediately say, what's wrong, Sara? What happened? You sound like you're not feeling well. That type of nuance we get without any processing. It just happens with that. I don't know how far off it is that we have the sensory, that the AI has the sensory to actually act and feel and process that piece. We may be able to make them look humanoid, but or that computer in a humanoid form, but I still think we're much further away than people think.
Yeah, and I think that does a disservice to being human at the core, because not only if you put your hand on a rock, you're not just sensing the rock, you may be remembering a time you put your hand on a tombstone of visiting your mother's grave that felt similar. And it's not a conscious connection, but as a human being, you know, we carry all of that everywhere we go. And if we want the machines to do that, fine, but what is the purpose other than to have a human experience? So that the tagging of it as human and consciousness and intelligence and all these words that I see a lot in the news about it, to me is just a little missing the mark.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, and part of what inspired me to write this book, because the one piece I didn't mention yet was in between the AI's Dear User poems, in which it addresses its user trying to know it, are voices. And they are very specific. And I chose the characters that are in the voice poems on purpose. One, as interesting reading. The second was I wanted it to be as confusing as possible for this machine to try to identify what it means to be human, because it is so hard. It is very
confusing. Yes, you could know somebody for a very long time and find out that they really don't like you that much.
Yeah, or that they've been through something that you would never have guessed.
Yeah.
So all of those little pieces are I mean, honestly, this was one of my favorite books to write, and I worked on it a long time. I spent several years putting it together because it wasn't just the poems themselves. It was the whole story that I wanted to get exactly right and tell this story that we're talking about. I don't know if
I got to go back to work, but I think I have to. I know what I'm doing tonight. So the book is Call Me
Spes.
So this is, I had trouble with the way the word was pronounced, but I'm always not good at that. But
it's those Greek words.
I'm going to say that, if you want a little bit of an out of mind experience, get into Sara's head a little bit, and it's because it opens things up, right? We're scrolling through this other data that's all top of mind. Everything that we're consuming these days are just the top of the, it's a soundbite. It's some, what's trending at that moment. But this, especially if you're concerned with AI, and you've got to be concerned with AI, because it's just something you should be able to talk about at your next cocktail party. And this would be a good subject to say, well, have you read Sara's new book? And I'm very looking forward to it. I'll probably post something in the narrative after this, after I've read a little bit. And I'm interested in it because I am more of a novel reader than a poetry reader. Our friend Ed has given me plenty of poetry books and some of the things, and sometimes I get it. Sometimes I'm reading and I don't get it. I think I'm going to get this really well because of its narrative thing.
I think you will.
So pick this up. It's online, and
anywhere books are sold.
Anywhere books are sold. So Sara Cahill Marron, and thank you very much for coming to Cognitive Resonance.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for
we
inviting me.
appreciate having you.